So we are in Unit 3 from theory perspective, from lab perspective. These are the list of lab experiments. And this one we have covered when we are going through the BTech lab experiment. In that we cover full scan, half open scan, stealth scan, Xmas scan using Nmap. So the command was nmap minus sx for Xmas minus ss for stealth scan minus st for full scan, and also not from the cyberforensic.org but from the emki.cj we have created and analyzed a spoofed email online tool and analyzed the email headers. So these two experiments we have covered from our previous lab. There we cover or the first or second lab there we covered the fifth semester BTech lab experiment. So today now I am going to discuss the 8 and 9. Exploiting eternal blue vulnerability, finding eternal blue vulnerability in Windows 7 using Metasploit tool on Kali Linux. So eternal blue is a cyber attack exploit developed by the US National Security Agency. It was leaked by the Shadow Broker hacker group on April 14, 2017. The NSA spent almost a year hunting for a bug in Microsoft software. Once they found it, the NSA developed Eternal Blue to exploit the vulnerability. On May 12, 2017, the worldwide WannaCry ransomware used this exploit to attack on past computers. On June 27, 2017, the exploit was again used to help carry out the 2017 NotPetya cyber attacks on more unpatched computers. So at the end of 2018, millions of systems were still vulnerable to Eternal Blue. This had led to millions of dollars in damage due primarily to ransomware wars. Due to massive impacts of WannaCry, both NotPetya and BadRabbit caused over 1 billion worth of damage in over 65 countries. The exploit was reported to have been used since March 2016 by Chinese hacking group Buckeye. The Eternal Blue exploitation tool was leaked by the Shadow Broker Group in their fifth leak. The leak includes many exploitation tools like Eternal Blue that are based on multiple vulnerabilities in the Windows implementation of SME protocol. Eternal Blue works on all Windows versions prior to Windows 8. This version contains an inter-process communication share, that is IPC dollar, that allows null system. The NSA created a framework much like Metasploit named Fudgebunch, which was part of the leak. The purpose of this framework is to configure, for example, set victim IP and execute the exploitation tool. Microsoft released patches for the vulnerability in the leak under the MS-17010 Microsoft Security Bulletin. CVE 2017-0114 is the CVE ID in MS-17010 that is related to Eternal Blue. So now, how does Eternal Blue work? The Eternal Blue exploit works by taking advantage of SMB1 vulnerability present in older version of Microsoft operating system. SMB version 1 was first developed in early 1983 as a network communication protocol to enable shared access to files, printers, and ports. It was essentially a way for Windows machines to talk to one another and other devices for remote services. The exploit make use of The way Microsoft Windows handles or rather mishandles specially crafted packets from malicious attackers. All the attacker need to do is send the maliciously crafted packet to the target server and then is it the malware propagates and a cyber attacks ensues. Microsoft patch closes the security vulnerability completely, thus preventing attempts at deploying ransomware, malware, or any other worm-like attempts at digital infiltration using the Eternal Blue exploit. So, how we will implement exploit or how we will exploit Eternal Blue vulnerability? So in order to practice the eternal blue vulnerability, we have to deploying machine setup. We can fire off your Windows 7 virtual machine and run either of the deploying command to enable SMB1 on your virtual machine. So in order to enable SMB version 1 using PowerShell set, we can set deploying path and we can type the word, we can set the values. Then these are the commands. This the command using cmd means we can open the command editor in or we can open the DOS command editor in Windows and we can type remv enable smb1 sc.exe config landman station depend equal this and then we shall set start to AUT. The above command should be used. We will be using Rapid7 Metasploit to exploit the vulnerability and we can use Kali Linux as the attacking machine since it comes bundled with a lot of pre-installed tools. We are supposed to start by enumerating the target, but since we already know that the given target is vulnerable to eternal blue exploit, we can directly jump to the third steps of hacking, that is gaining access. We need use deploying command to start Metasploit in the terminal. In order to initialize Metasploit database, we can type sudo init and then in order to start Metasploit we can run this command sudo msf console. Metasploit take you about 20 seconds to start. Once the MSF console is up and running, you will see a window like this. So this window open when we open the meta exploit. The exploit that we will be using is called exploit windows smb ms17 underscore 010 underscore eternal. So you have to either install a Windows 7 in order to fully experiment this or fully exploit this vulnerability because these are patch-ups in Windows 8, Windows 10. In our MSF console, we need to enter the deploying command to load the given exploit. We can type use exploit slash Windows slash SMB slash MS17 slash underscore 010 underscore eternal. We use option command to check the required configuration options for the attacks. So the required options are R hosts, we have to set R port, we have to set L host, we have that is our listening IP and L port is our listening port. So R host we set as a target IP of the Windows machine, and R port the port on which the assembly version 1 is running, usually either 193 or 445. We can use set options value to set the required option. We can use run or exploit command to run the exploit. Once this exploit is successfully completed, we'll be presented with a metaflater shell. And now we have successfully gained access. Not now, but if you install Windows 7, then we can get access to the target machine, which means we can now modify the victim files in whatever way you feel. But the exploit can be used to deploy any type of cyber attack, including cryptojacking and worm-like malware. The NSA hack opened the door for any attacker to send a malicious packet to a vulnerable server that has not applied to the patches to fix CVE 2017-0144. WannaCry is the name of worldwide ransomware attack made possible by the Eternal Blue exploit. So financial damage by Eternal Blue. I say it caused the damage of nearly $1 billion. Estimate put the cost of NotPetya at over $10 billion in damages and WannaCry at around 4 billion in damage. Some big name or hit quite hard. The world's largest shipping firm Maersk lost 300 million. The delivery company Fedler X lost 400 million, and the Merck Pharmaceutical lost 870 million after 15,000 of their Windows machines succumbed to NotPetya in just 90 seconds. So it is this type of mandatory losses that make cyber attacks so dangerous for society at large. So by installing Windows 7 in virtual machine or any PC or any laptop, we can exploit from Kali. We can open Metasploit in Kali. We can set the host, our host, the IP address of our Windows machine, and we can run the exploit. So as I have already discussed, okay, so now all are present. So initially Jack was present, then I discussed the list of experiment. In that I said this experiment we have covered. This experiment of full scan, half open scan, stealth scan, Xmas scan using Nmap we have covered when I was covering the BTech lab experiment. So 4 was covered. In BTech lab experiment, we have also covered creating and analyzing a scooped email using. In BTech lab experiment, we use some other website. Here they have mentioned some other website, but the work was the same. So these two we have covered, and these two we now covered. Experiment 8 and experiment 9 we now covered. Now I am going with SQL injection. There are so many types of SQL injection: in-band, out-of-band, inferential. Again, in-band type of SQL injection can classify into error-based, union-based. Out-of-band, there is no further classification, but inferential SQL injection has again two types: Boolean-based and time-based. So, what are the problems that may be exploited by SQL injection. How the pen tester can save the organization and what are the so how the pen tester can save the organization and what are the technique he or she can able to use to secure loss of CIA tried policy of the organization by data breaches, data manipulation, data loss with existing vulnerability of SQL injection in the website. Here we will discuss how this vulnerability can be exploited and what are various ways the pen tester can check the vulnerability and various mitigation techniques to process the vulnerability from the exploitation. As the SQLI is more dangerous one and it should be properly handled in order to avoid the future risks. In this presentation we will or maybe lecture we will discuss one of the unique mitigation techniques that is demilitarization of the database first recall. When the SQL injection attack was successfully done by the attacker, attacker will get the access permission of the first person in the table as per the traditional database. The first person will always the administrator. So, what are the social welfare benefits if we avoid SQL injection? So the SQL injection pen testing technique that will be more beneficial for the pen tester to find the zero-day vulnerability, especially in the case of the web application security. The web application pen testers play the important role in finding the vulnerability that cause the security risks and reporting it to the concerned organization to ensure the safety of the organization. The organization should always do the pen testing for the web application using the above discussed method so it can avoid the security risk. This keeps the data of the users and organization on data in very secure. These techniques will be helpful for the organization to prevent the data from the misuse. The main goal is that even though the attacker success in his attacks of SQL injection, he can he can't able to access the data of the organization after the digitalization. A bit of data is considered as the so implementation of SQL is covered in 5 different types of steps. Each step has its unique way of implementation for a different scenario of the website. Even though the SQL injection is the A1 vulnerability, malicious code for injection should properly created for the bypassing of the constraint given by the developer. So these are the steps we may highlight. So the four steps required in the SQL injections. We should have to find the input field. We can create the malicious input. We can loading the payload, analyzing the error and modifying our payload. And we can bypass the constants. Then step one is finding the input field. How? We'll do this. In the get-based injection, the parameter taken from the user is passing through the URL. Based on the parameter that passed on the URL, the server processes the HTTP request and create the query of the database. In the case, the pen tester can directly inject the malicious code into the URL steps to get compromised. For example, this is the website login.php. We are passing users and we are passing admin. Here the attacker should insert the malicious code in the URL itself in such a way that login.php user equal 1 or 1 equal 1 and password also equal 1 equal 1. In post-based injection, it is a slightly different from get-based injection. In the get-based injection, the parameter taken from the user is passing to the HTTP header. As the parameter that passed on the HTTP header file, the server process user input that was taken from the HTTP header. Then the server process request and create the query of the database. In this case, the pen tester can directly inject the malicious code into the text field of login form directly to get compromise the constants. Then the third types of SQL injection is header and cookie based. Parameter in post method, we can't be able to see how the parameter can be taken, and so we are using the proxy server like Burpsuite or OSWAP. Here we should capture the user request, and from before reaching it into the server, the capture request contain the parameter of input field are tampered with malicious logic and sending back the request to the server for processing. In the header or cookie based injection, the header field of the browser request will be changed and forwarded to the server. So see, parameter captured in HTTP header, we are using one verb shift. We are going to proxy and then we capture some parameter. Here intercept is on. Then we are tempering the parameter. So here text user was 123 and text password was 123. This we capture. Now we are tempering it to hello e as user and hello as a text pass. Then what response received for the tempered parameters? You see, hello is written in a login and hello password both are passing through, but it's so okay. Both are invalid username and password. So step 2, creating the malicious input. The payload that need to be injected has to be written clearly according to the logics and scenario of the website by the pen tester. The payload will be different for different websites. Pen tester need to clearly code the payload. The payload forming logic is mainly divided into two types. One in-band, three types. In-band, out-band. We have seen those. Here we have seen this one. In-band, out-of-band inferential. So you can say in-band. Step 3. Loading the payload and then analyzing the error. The payload which we created need to load in this user input field. It can any one of the input three field. Once we had submit the payload, we need to observe the website response. Sometimes it show database error like database invalid query or invalid username according to the response displayed. We need to perform the modification and continue our work of injecting the payload in user's field. For example, for blind injection, select a star from table where users equal input and password equal blank. We can use any of these options before users or before password. Then steps 4 is bypassing the constraints. Once the attack was successfully done, the attacker can able to bypass the login page. He can access the confidential record of the user. Most probably he or she will get the administrator privilege. When we are doing the SQL injection attack, we are not specifying the username or password that are actually stored in the database, so everyone can get the questions in whose account the attacks will happen. Not specifying the username and password that are actually stored. So here we assume it may be administrator, it may be admin. So we'll try and try. We'll put user as admin, we'll put user as administrator. So as per the traditional database creation, the first users of the database will be always the admin. Login credential will be stored. If the attack was successfully done, the attacker will be logged in into the database with the administrator credential. So see how it happens. Attackers open any login page and they type user as 1 or 1 equal 1. and inside password they type 1 or 1 equal 1. The web application send the parameters to server as HTTP request. At the server side, the substitution of the parameter takes place. Request sent to the database. Database checks the username and password and send true because the given inputs are malicious code. That is always true. Then, if there is a positive response sent from the servers, login successfully performed and the hacker get logged into the system. So operational or functional diagram of the SQL injection is this. We find the input field in the website, we create the page load based on the condition, then we inject the malicious code into the input fields. If these are false, if it is an error, we can modify the payload and repeat the steps. If there is a no error, if it is true, if no error given, the payload compromise the login page logic. So these are the live implementation, and this fifth slides was created by one BTech student, and he showed me the some live implementation and then created some slide that way. Was the problem? Maybe the some technical, also the font size, and but the work was perfectly fine. So they use SQL map tool where the get parameter is in bold, and then the website may be vulnerable to this mode of SQL injection, and then attacker may be able to gain access to information in the database. So see, this is a website testphp.vulnweb.com. There is a slash list product.php and then query string cat equal 1. So cat equal 1 means the value of it can be modified and it can go, and it can exploit SQL vulnerability. Okay. Then we open SQL map And inside that SQL map, here you can see the command. So when we open the SQL map and they are typing the command is here SQL map minus u and they are typing the URL testphp.vulnb.com slash listproduct.php slash cat equal 1 minus dbs. So here you see the payload executed. If payload say cat equal 1 and then they are it showed the type is error based, then their error type is a time based blind, and their type is a union query. So SQL map resumed the flowing injection points from the stored seasons. There are one, two, three, four. Four types of payload executed, and the backends we see the backend is a DBMS MySQL version in 5.6, and it is fetching database name also. Database name is a ACUART and information schema. And the command is simple SQL map minus u, the target URL, and if you want to extract the database name, then we can type minus dbs, which we have discussed in our previous class where we have discussed so many commands. For extracting dbs, we type here dbs. For extracting table, there are other options. For extracting column, there are some other options. And the command is simple SQL map minus u and the URL. So after extracting the database name, they re-execute this command using SQL map minus u http this and then minus u SUART minus tables. Then it show the table name. It show the database name, it show the version, it show the database name, and it show there are 8 tables. And they show the all table names. If we use minus tables in place of minus dbs. Then after accessing the table, we can also execute minus tables. We can pass the database name minus the database name and we can write minus table. Then it will show the table available in ACUART database. And if you want to store all table inside our PC, then we can use a command called minus dump. And the backend DBMS is MySQL. So the operating system is Linux Ubuntu. They say web application technology is NGINX, which I discussed in today class. This is a web server name, and it's a warning. So missing database parameter. SQL map is going to use the current database to enumerate table entries, and now they are fetching current database in our local PC. And see, so they fetch the table detail, and here see the table name is a username is a Harjeet, and there is a password, there is a username, there is a phone number, there is a email, there is a address. So we get the username and password. So we open testphp.vulnb.com slash login.php and we type username and password test. And this is the case study with of SQL injection. So there also this is a Chandrapur district COVID-19 patient management portal. In that they have some PS database inside. So these are the front end, but guessing from the front end, they are able to access some data. So mitigation technique of SQLi they are proposing in order to storing the admin and password, we should store the first record in the database of the user record who don't have any access privilege of the database. That may be anything in order to mislead the hacker. So now I think we have covered in today's lab. We have discussed the steps of eternal blue vulnerability and create and SQL injection. So in today's lab we discussed 8, 9, 11. 4 and 10 we have covered during our BTech lab experiment. And then next Tuesday we shall discuss rest, all other lab experiments. So this slide up to 45 I am going to share you. Members are Jack Johnson, Lim Sayed Maj, Vanita. So who is absent? Jack Johnson, Sayed Maj, Vanita also, Lim also.
Sir, I'm present.
All present. No, Kubra? Kubra absent. Okay, so present, present, Sayed Maj present, Vanita present, Kubra absent. Okay, thank you so much for your time. I am going to share the lab slides. You can practice.